Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today we're continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project. And I got a fun and interesting video for you guys this evening, because we're going to be talking about what it's going to take to keep the FPGA fun train rolling into the future. For as many awesome hardware variants and developments we get, and as many cores as we have for these devices, we definitely could be getting more. And that's down to the fact that if you really think about it, FPGA gaming doesn't have that many active developers actually making these cores. Now this is not a complaint, it's just an observation. We're going to talk about who's making what and just show you how few people are actually involved in this overall ecosystem. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, down below hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But when we've been talking about all of these new cores lately, every single time I do voiceover, one of about 3 different names comes out of my mouth. When we talked all about the Nintendo 64 core development, of course we were talking about Robert, or FPGA Zoom's boss, one of the developers that was working on MiSTer FPGA in the last like 3 to 4 plus years, and he's done an absolutely amazing job making stuff like Nintendo 64 as well as PlayStation 1. If we think about what it takes to make these cores, you need to be a retro gaming fan who can also write FPGA code and has free time. That's the Venn diagram right there, and there isn't much overlap between these 3 categories, and that is why a lot of people that can probably write FPGA code and could develop cores don't make them, because they're just not retro gaming fans or they don't have free time. And it's not like FPGA development and coding is an easy task. Even if someone is well versed in writing computer code, that does not mean that they've ever touched VHDL or Verilog, 2 of the main code bases for something like actually writing a core. And it's not like we just have the cores, we have so many different improvements that people like Robert have given us, and that is absolutely to be celebrated. But wouldn't it be amazing if we had 3 or 4 more Roberts out there making different cores for different systems? That's kind of what I'm trying to get at here. FPGA gaming, as far as hardware installation base is concerned, is always growing month to month, but the amount of developers actually working on these cores doesn't really seem to expand all that often anymore. The newest core developer name I've heard recently in these CDI previews is Slammy. He's been making that CDI core, but he's one of the first new names I've noticed in like the last year or so, and that's just the type of thing we definitely want to see more fresh blood coming in on the software development side. Before you go down below and write learn to code, I'm sure you will, hopefully in good humor. It is just a very specific skill set. Now I can't code for half a crap. I've developed like 2 things for the 3DO M2 in the past. Both of them were held together with band-aids and dreams, so trust me, it's not like I could just sit down and do this either. So I'm not really trying to make light of the fact that this is an easy process, but someone like Robert alone has given us PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, and Game Boy Advance, 3 of some of the best cores on the platform. But think if he never actually decided to develop for something like MiSTer FPGA, we would just be completely missing these 3 cores, because it's not like someone came along and decided to do a secondary one. Or think about somebody like SRG 320. We're talking about his development efforts on the Sega Saturn side of things, and he is another name that has a lot of cores under his belt when it comes to MiSTer FPGA and retro gaming and FPGA in general. And these are not easy cores to make, and again, you have to have that perfect Venn diagram of skill sets and free time. You've got to love retro games, you need to be able to actually code and reverse engineer the hardware and then put it into an FPGA code base, and you also have to have the desire to want to do it in the first place. That is a rare skill set. You need to have all 3 or else nothing basically happens. And stuff like Sega Saturn has been so amazing to watch and has brought a lot more people not only to MiSTer FPGA but to being fans of the Sega Saturn, because usually when I would talk about Saturn before the core, so many comments would just be that Saturn sucked, that Sega failed with it, and that it wasn't a good console. Now every single comment I get is just excitement to see what the new core developments are, and people discovering Sega Saturn games that they either didn't know existed or had heard that weren't good and hear differently from the video. And that is awesome. It keeps the hardware alive, it keeps these games alive, and it keeps the love and excitement for something like Sega Saturn alive. And because yes, back in the day it was considered an also ran compared to Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 1, seeing Sega Saturn get a resurgence here and more love has been awesome just for me to see, because I've always loved the console, and a lot of that new love is just down to SRG 320 bringing over Sega Saturn to MiSTer FPGA. And just again think, if we had 3 or 4 more SRG 320s working on different cores, we could be having all that extra love spread across platforms that definitely deserve it. And it's not like it's just Sega Saturn from SRG 320 either. The Sega 32X core is his work, kind of derivative of the Sega Saturn because they do have some hardware in common. But again, the point is, if you took SRG 320 out of the equation, if you didn't ever decide to make cores for MiSTer FPGA, you wouldn't have Sega Saturn, you wouldn't have 32X, and you wouldn't have some other cores which I haven't shown you yet. And it's just so fun to have these pieces of hardware preserved in FPGA technology and playable by anyone with a MiSTer, because trust me, FPGA gaming isn't going anywhere. Maybe there'll be a new FPGA platform next year from a different company. Maybe in 5 years time there'll be 3 different competing companies releasing the same hardware saying that their core is better than the other person's core. FPGA hardware as a gaming foundation is just heating up, and I assure you, you're going to be hearing about it for a long time. But it is all coming down to the popularity of MiSTer and these fans that have developed cores, because it's not like MiSTer is a corporation. There is no salary, there is no vacation time, there are no benefits. People just make the cores because they have a love for the games and they have the talent and ability to do so, and that's always something that we should celebrate. But again, SRG 320, it's not like it's just Sega Saturn and Sega 32X. Of course, we also have something like Super Nintendo, which he also developed and just recently updated for. So here are 3 more huge systems made by one person in FPGA. Although I bet if SRG 320 hadn't done Super Nintendo, somebody else would have come along and done that job. But again, just trying to trace down my point here. Every single time we talk about some of the biggest cores from MiSTer FPGA, they are from these same people, but the quantity of people is just too thin to keep this thing rolling along the tracks. If any one developer decided just to walk away and not make anything else, we'd have a huge loss on our hands. Or take something like the Neo Geo core here, developed by Sorg on some work that Furtek did on decapping and reverse engineering the Neo Geo AES and MVS. This is my absolute favorite arcade system of all time, and it is here because Sorg decided to bring that code over and develop a Neo Geo core for the system. If you're not familiar with Sorg's name, not what I mentioned on the channel as much, because a lot of the cores he's made are already here and have been for years, but he also basically is the mind behind MiSTer FPGA, dealing with a lot of the low-level issues that the actual operating system depends on to be able to be a MiSTer FPGA. But he definitely has a lot of good cores under his belt, and again, if there was no Sorg, there would be no MiSTer FPGA. So I'm really trying to drive that point home, that there are just a handful of people out there really working on this project and making MiSTer FPGA what you're playing today and which you will be playing in the future. And yes, there's channels like me or Pixel Cherry Ninja that go out and celebrate, teach you guys how to use it, teach you guys how to build the hardware, and otherwise make sure that the excitement is out there in the public eye. But again, as much as I'd love to make an FPGA core, it just isn't in my skill set. Could I go back to school, get a different degree, learn that code, and do it? I'm sure I could. I pretty much can do anything if I set my mind to it. But again, do I have the free time? Absolutely not. And that's when we go back to that Venn diagram of free time, the ability to actually do the code, and the love of the games. I've got 2 of the 3, but the free time just isn't there. And Sorg did stuff like the Mega Drive cores as well. Obviously, an amazing 16-bit system from Sega. So again, when you think about it, all of these cores, and right now we've only mentioned 3 different developers, and I'm not going to be able to mention every single core developer in this video. If you don't hear your name mentioned and you worked on a core, it's not because I don't love that core, it's just because I had to keep this thing cut down condensed to time, as well as the actual theme behind the video. But it's not like it's just 4 people making cores, it's 4 people making the large majority of the cores that you're probably going to play on a daily basis, like NES here from Sorg. You get NES, you get the Famicom Disk System, you get an entire generation of Nintendo gaming preserved in FPGA, and it is here and available for everyone. But again, if Sorg had never decided to actually work on this project, there would be no MiSTer FPGA in the future. And honestly, there just aren't new names coming into the mix. The same core developers I've been talking about and their videos for the last like 3 or 4 years are the same names I'm talking about now. Or think of someone like Wickerwaka, absolutely nailed it with the IREM boards. Getting IREM M92 was absolutely spectacular, and a lot of people discovered these games for the first time. If Wickerwaka hadn't come around and decided that MiSTer FPGA needed an IREM M92 implementation, I don't know if anybody else would have actually decided to do that. Clearly he loves IRIM because he also has the M107 core. Not as many good games on that one as M92, but there are still a couple fun titles, and it just takes a fan with the free time and the ability to write this code to bring you something like the entire IRIM M92 library playable on MiSTer FPGA. And that again is amazing, because if you've never played these games before, stuff like Ninja Baseball, Batman, you need to play them. And I'm not even going to try to bother listing all of the cores Hotego and his team have made. They're absolutely numerous. Capcom CPS, CPS2, Konami stuff, Sega stuff. He's made dozens upon dozens of cores, and think how big of a loss it would be if Hotego decided never to make a MiSTer FPGA core in the first place. We'd be missing probably over 100 different games on MiSTer FPGA, some of the best arcade games of all time, not just made by Capcom, but made by anybody, and that makes a big difference in the quantity of fun. Or David Shadoff here, D Shadoff, depending on how you want to say his username. He made the PC Engine and TurboGrafx core, an absolutely spectacular implementation of the hardware, and I hope sometime soon he makes a PCFX core, because I keep telling him people do want to play that. But again, if he just didn't decide to make some cores, then we really wouldn't have much of anything now, would we? And that's what I'm slightly concerned about for the future, because the FPGA gaming space definitely needs fresh blood as far as people developing cores. It's not like MiSTer FPGA or any of the analog projects are getting any smaller. More and more people come to the MiSTer FPGA ecosystem every single week, buy their first MiSTer FPGA triple stack, and start playing. But as far as more core developers, you need to find that magical mix out there of people that love retro gaming hardware, have the ability to write the codes as well as the free time to create them, because again, it's not like MiSTer is a corporation. They're not going to put out any application. You're not going to apply and then go through a negotiation period to see whether you want to work for MiSTer Corp. It is just for the love of the game, and I'm sure there's other people out there that have all three skill sets: time, knowledge, as well as love for retro gaming, that just maybe don't know about this yet. Do I have a solution to the problem? No, I do not, but it is something I'm thinking about in the future. I was chatting with Andy D about how we need more core developers, and he agreed, and a video came out of it. I'm sure that I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.